Gen Z, let's talk about Gen Z, guys. All right, so this channel is called Cole Hastings, and it was recommended to me by my lead Discord moderator, Baron. I had a look at the video before a little bit, and I thought this is pretty good. Cole Hastings tells us that he seeks nuance. I appreciate that, so let's see how he does it here. He's telling us about Gen Z's radicalization shouldn't surprise us.
On the surface, Gen Z looks just like any other generation before them, sort of. But beneath their external appearances are some of the most extreme ideologies the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
Take a look at this guy. He goes by the name Clavicular online. Seems like a normal dude, right? But if you watch even 30 seconds of one of his videos, he will start using words that, to maybe 80% of people who speak English, seem completely made up.
So we take a look and we've got a lot of rosacea, just showing you a basic way to improve by 1 to 2 PSL, because these two things, these two softmaxes can go a long way. You know, with the lack of facial angularity.
Well, I can get facial angularity, but honestly, up to that point, if you told me that he was pulling my leg, I would have believed it. Like, what on earth?
It's causing me to have an overly wide perceived facial width to height ratio.
Clavicular is part of a group of people called Looksmaxers who first spawned on internet forums. Looksmaxers are obsessed with doing anything and everything they can to maximize what they call their PSL and SMV, their personal look scale and sexual market value, respectively.
Sexual market value? You know, I don't have anything against people who are trying to maximize, you know, bodybuilders, old school bodybuilders. I always respected them. Of course, I wish they didn't use all the drugs they used back in the day, but you know what I mean. Someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger is really cool. And, yeah, of course, they obsessed over every inch because that's what they do. Sexual market value. You say it's basically sex appeal. I get it, but when you say it like that, it sounds so superficial. But anyway, I don't want to interrupt the man.
I believe that the only thing that determines basically all areas of success in your life is your looks, and to not obsess over your looks is doing yourself a massive disservice.
Do you value hard work at all?
No, absolutely not. I value efficient work. I value smart work. Hard work is a ridiculous concept.
Okay, after he qualified it, and this guy has a massive deltoid. After he qualified it and says, I don't value hard work, I value smart, efficient work. If you qualify it like that, I'm like, I can see it. I can see it.
In order to optimize his looksmaxing, Clavicular has been injecting testosterone since the age of 14, and he plans on flying to Turkey soon for a double jaw surgery. According to online sources...
Why does he need a double jaw surgery? He's like a good-looking guy. He looks like an actor. I mean, then again, if he's an adult, he can do whatever he wants. But then again,
he's only 19 years old. And yet he has adopted what I think most people would consider a very radicalized view of the world. Subgroups of different extremist ideologies like looksmaxing are not uncommon these days. Now we have groypers, a term used to identify followers or fans of white nationalist and live streamer Nick Fuentes.
He doesn't self-identify as a white nationalist, though, so I don't know if we should call him a white nationalist, because he was asked by... We should watch together the interview that he had with Piers Morgan. What did you guys think about that, by the way? But during that interview, I think Piers Morgan asked him, do you consider yourself a white nationalist? Didn't he say no, or did I dream it? I don't know. We'll see.
On the left side, we have Antifa, or anarcho-communists, or tankies glorifying authoritarian communist regimes.
Okay, I already like this guy because he's being fair. He's being fair. He's like pointing out both sides, because oftentimes these days, the people that will point the finger at the likes of Nick Fuentes, they will never even admit that Antifa exists. And if they do, they won't consider them. They will come to you and tell you, oh, they're not radical. Are you saying they're being anti-fascism? And then they use all the twisting of words. So I appreciate he did say that he was going to look at nuance. And so far, he hasn't disappointed. I appreciate that. Okay, good stuff. Because I'd say people that blow up freaking ICE or try to blow up with bombs, ICE facilities, like, yeah, pretty radicalized. Am I right?
We have black pillars holding similar beliefs to looksmaxers in regards to the fact that the only thing that matters is looks, while extending their beliefs outside of the looks realm to an all-encompassing doomeristic view of the world.
I see.
We have hyper-masculine traditionalists and tradwives who think we should repeal the 19th Amendment, and hyper-feminists who think men are the source of all evil.
I love tradwife. My wife is a tradwife, but not an extremist. She's not an extremist, but she's a tradwife.
When you scroll through the trenches of social media, Reddit, or underground internet forums, your first instinct might be to ask, how could anyone seriously think like this? But if you understood the world much of Gen Z inhabits, and how that world compares to the history of past generations of radicalized youth, this would not surprise you at all. So today, I want to talk a little bit about that history. I want to explain to you why the youth have always radicalized during moments like these, how that radicalization has adapted to the internet era, and offer a way toward maybe, just maybe, not necessarily compassion, but at the very least understanding. And then we can talk about what it would actually take to pull ourselves out of this.
Excellent presenter, I have to say, up to this point. I do want to say that when it comes to compassion, I'm all for compassion when it comes to the victims. I do not, however, have compassion to perpetrators. Just want to say, since we discussed radicalization at this point, right? When someone is radicalized to a point of violence, for instance, my compassion is for the victims. Please.
In order to understand Gen Z's radicalization, we need to look at its contributing factors. It's not enough to just throw up our hands and say, wow, these people are so out of touch and stupid, as true as that might seem in some cases. We need to ask, what kind of world produces young people who think this way? Switching the framing like that can provide us with a perspective that might help cool our anger towards these groups' harmful or hateful beliefs, while allowing us to observe historical trends that answer the question I just posed. Historically, young people are more prone to radicalization when certain conditions are met. And the conditions I want to focus on in this video are economic instability and declining optimism, adults and institutions failing to provide stable meaning and a sense of generational betrayal, and massive technological shifts.
Excellent. Did you notice that all three things happened in 1940s and 1930s Germany?
And if it isn't obvious to you already, all of these kind of work in tandem. One affects the other, and so forth and so forth. So let's go over the first point, economic instability and declining optimism, using a time where mass radicalization of the youth reached a somewhat similar popularity as it has today, post-World War I Germany.
Absolutely.
Germany came out of the war defeated and humiliated, sending the economy into full hyperinflation. By 1923, the monthly inflation rate peaked around 29,500%, meaning prices were doubling every few days. One US dollar, which cost 50 marks in 1920, was suddenly worth 4.2 trillion marks by November 1923. Middle-class savings, pensions, and long-term wages were basically erased, and if you're young people watching your parents' finances vanish overnight, the message is pretty clear. The system doesn't work, and the adults in charge have no idea what they're doing. Hyperinflation got tamed by 1924, but the damage to trust was done. Then, the Great Depression hit. Industrial output fell by roughly 30%, and by 1932, around 6.1 million Germans were unemployed, about 1/3 of the working age.
I knew it was bad, but I didn't remember 6.1 million in 1932 and unemployed?
Population. Historians writing about this period talk about a, quote, lost generation of jobless youth whose entire entry into adult life was barricaded. Being young in 1930s Germany often meant no job, no prospects, and no clear place in society. Does that sound familiar? Now let's talk about how this funneled young people into extremist thinking. In this context, radical political groups became one of the only places offering a story that made sense out of the chaos and a path to feeling useful and important. On the far right, the Nazi Party and its orbit leaned hard into youth recruitment. After the crash, Nazi electoral support exploded from about 2% of the vote in 1928 to 38% by mid-1932.
And then Hitler's youth afterwards, like when they were starting to push the propaganda on the children so that they would grow up into being absolute recipients and in fact vectors of their own ideologies, is insane, which is why I am so passionately against propaganda onto our children in school. Because if you have even slightly looked into what they did during these extreme regimes in the 1940s in Europe and Russia, because it's not like the communists didn't do this kind of stuff, absolutely they did, then you recognize the pattern. And today is even more powerful because technology is at a complete different level, never mind the radio.
Making them the largest party in the Reichstag. Paramilitary groups like the SA and earlier Freikorps units, often made up of men in their 20s, gave disoriented young guys uniforms, camaraderie, and a sense of political purpose. But the clearest example of this youth funnel is the Hitler Youth. Membership was relatively modest at the end of 1932, about 108,000 boys. But after the Nazis took power and started suppressing rival youth organizations, membership skyrocketed to 2.3 million by 1933 and around 3.6 million by 1934, and kept climbing in the later 1930s. It's important to note that people don't necessarily adopt extremist racist ideologies simply because of economic instability. But if there's some part of that embedded already within the culture, and then a strong enough, confident enough political leader produces enough propaganda to convince you that your problems will be solved if you attach yourselves to these racist ideologies, that's when it really starts to sprout.
And you see, I appreciate again the video. It's really good. I love the method. One thing I'm going to say, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, I haven't got a clue about his politics, but really it doesn't matter. That's why, you see, when I often tell you, look at what they're doing now. They're taking someone, a specific ethnic group, white people, and they tell us that's the source of all your problems. They need to be stopped. They need to be shamed. They need to apologize. They did this. That's the reason why you're It's the same tactics. It's the same tactics. Now, obviously, there is also extreme racism on the other side where people are like, anyone who isn't white, they're awful, is awful or whatever you want. I oppose that too. The difference, however, is that any form of anti-non-white racism is frowned upon. And you lose your access to your bank account if you do anything like that. You lose your ability to speak. You lose your career. You get fired. And depending on where you live, say the UK, you might even end up in jail if you show strong racist connotations. And hear me out, because I'm going to make a strong point here. If you show strong racist, anti-black, anti-brown, whatever you want, sentiment in your line of thinking, in your public sphere, you will be stopped. You will be frowned upon. You will have consequences. You lose your job. You lose anything. That doesn't make it look like what happened in Nazi Germany. Because what happened in Nazi Germany is that when the politicians and the propagandists, when they were pushing their racist agenda, do you think that people were like, oh, you can't say that it's the fault of the Jews or black or the Roma or the gypsies and the disabled people? These are the 5 groups that were generally speaking targeted by Hitler. Do you think that anyone who was pushing that propaganda was losing their access to the bank account, being shamed, demonetized online? I know there isn't such a thing, but you know what I mean? No, they were encouraged by the media. It was pushed everywhere. It was taught to the children, and they used all forms of media to push the message as real and true. The only group in our current age that will receive directed, targeted attacks without any repercussion, and in fact with the push of academia, is white people. That's a fact. So what is happening now to white people is the equivalent of what was happening in the 1930s in Germany against Jews, black people, disabled people, Roma, Gypsy, and the like. It's the same thing. In fact, academia was supporting the Nazi. And who is academia supporting now? It's all about white people are horrible, but at the same time, white people don't exist. So the white culture, there is no culture, but they do exist, white people, when we want them to collectively apologize for what they have done. What? As if we were now one single entity, only when you have to attack us. We just watched a video where people were saying how disgusted they were because, oh, I have a certain percentage of European. Oh, it's awful. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. And what are the videos and channels that are untouched and still monetized regardless of their racist agenda? Black power. I can prove it. It's the truth. No repercussion whatsoever. They can write the most awful titles ever. It's fine. Nothing. That's the truth. Don't know what to tell you, but it's the truth.
On the far left, there was somewhat of a similar story. The Young Communist League of Germany, the youth wing of the Communist Party, grew into a dedicated militant organization whose membership peaked in the tens of thousands by the last years of the Weimar Republic. So you have one set of youth channeling their anger into nationalist extremism and racial hierarchy, while another channeled it into revolutionary extremism and class war.
I love this guy.
But both sides are reacting to a structural reality where their future was stripped away from them, and in that reality, extremist organizations promise three things that normal institutions can no longer promise, which is certainty, belonging, and a future. Without thinking too hard, you can clearly see how much of this mirrors the material conditions and cultural narratives happening in the West today.
Yes.
The unemployment rate for Americans between 20 and 24 just hit a 10-year high, excluding the pandemic. And for the first time in the last 40 years or so, the unemployment rate for recent college graduates aged 22 to 27 is higher than the unemployment rate for all workers. While renting prices have cooled down significantly, the general cost of living has not. Any Gen Zer can tell you how unaffordable daily life feels now, even with an average job.
He's absolutely right.
And of course, the rising cost of education throws them into thousands of dollars of debt before they can even get started. In a system like this, it's no wonder that young people are more susceptible to latching on to extremist ideas, because those ideas, unlike the solutions proposed by people who are more nuanced and sit in the middle of the political spectrum, are vivid and establish a clear enemy, which to them, at least, is much better than having no purpose at all. But I want to expand upon that point a bit further after going into the next condition, which usually leads to radicalization in a society. Adults and institutions failing to provide stable meaning and a sense of generational betrayal. But first, I've been talking extensively on this channel about being chronically offline and the importance of that.
All right, so that's the sponsor. Let's see if we can guess it. We always play this game. Can we guess the sponsor? He's saying being chronically online. I think it's going to be some VPN. What do you guys think? Probably some kind of VPN? If it's a VPN, it can't be Atlas because they're out of business. Either Nord or CyberGhost. I'm going to say CyberGhost. It's either that, or it's the other sponsor, the one that goes around and checks Incogni. Maybe it's Incogni. So number one, I'm going to say CyberGhost. Number two, I'm going to say Incogni. Let's see. Oh, you think it could be the news site. Oh, so you mean... what is it called again? I know what you're saying. The one that like tells you ground news. Man, if it's ground news, that's a great sponsor. Let's see.
Is really going to be highlighted in the second half of this video, but one thing that's really helped me with that is e-ink devices, and that's why I'm happy to introduce today's sponsor.
We were all wrong. Never heard of this one.
The VWoods AI paper reader. If you aren't familiar, this is an e-ink device that uses a screen called Carta 1300 with a 300 pixels per inch display that manipulates tiny black and white particles. It is the perfect blend between digital and analog and has helped a ton with reducing my doom-scrolling addiction. I actually owned a larger e-ink device before, but VWoods device is the size of a phone and I can take it anywhere I go and runs on the Android 16 operating system. It's extremely well designed and very compact. Cool. Now, instead of pulling out my phone during my free time, I can open EPUBs and PDFs of books I've loaded onto the device and read without having to lug anything heavy around. While you're reading, you can also tap a button on the side to use AI to assist you if there's anything complex you need help understanding in your books. Then you can save the answer into your knowledge base stored on the device, so you have a concise and easy way to search for all the lessons. And
you know, that's not bad. I'm going to speed him up a little bit, but it doesn't look bad. Doesn't look bad. Cool.
Important plot points in your readings. On top of that, if you wanted this device to replace your phone, it absolutely could, since it runs on Android, so you can take calls and send messages too. And although the screen does have a backlight you can use if you're in a dark environment, if you turn the brightness all the way down, it doesn't produce any blue light like phones do, so it won't cause any eye strain or interfere with your sleep. So
I don't know if the blue light thing has been debunked or not. Do you know anything about that?
if you're interested in tackling your doom scrolling addiction and going more analog, you can click the first link in the description and try it out, and hopefully it will replace some or most of your phone usage.
That was a good pitch, I have to say. I'll look it up.
Before the internet became the youth's primary source of information, most of your sense of how the world works came from a few big pillars. Your family, school, maybe a church or religious community, and whatever image of the country you got from news, movies, and politics.
True.
If they're functioning well, they offer some kind of answer to questions like, what matters, who can I trust, and is the future worth working toward?
I want to add one more, the friends you mingle with. Because sometimes while the family has a powerful impact on your upbringing and the way you think in your early stages of your life. As you become a teenager, sometimes you connect so much with your friends and sometimes cousins. So in that case, cousin would be family. But depending, the kind of group that you hang around with is, it can change the way you perceive the world, even against the pillars that your family has produced. So just wanted to say that. But yeah, obviously your religion, 100%.
It's common for the youth to disagree or even rebel against the most common answers to these questions, but they still form a stable backdrop. Yeah. However, when these institutions start to feel hollow or hypocritical, that backdrop collapses. To see how this played out in the real world and relate it back to today, we can look at the late 1960s and early 1970s in the US and Western Europe. In the early 1960s, most Americans still believed the federal government was basically trustworthy. In 1964, about 77% of Americans said they trusted Washington to do what is right just about always or most of the time.
That's definitely before the hippie movement, 100%.
Within a decade, after the escalation of the Vietnam War, civil rights clashes, urban riots, and the Watergate scandal, that number had dropped to 36%, and by the end of the 1970s, it was around 25%. In other words, the default assumption went from the people in charge are trying, even if they mess up, to they're probably lying. At the same time, the Vietnam War made that loss of trust feel brutally personal, especially for young people. Between 1964 and 1973, the US military drafted about 2.2 million men out of an eligible pool of 27 million. The people deciding on the war were older, and the people forced to fight in it were overwhelmingly 18 to 26. That age gap is the emotional core of generational betrayal. The older people make these catastrophic decisions, and the younger bodies have to absorb the consequences. Then there's events like what happened at Kent State. On May 4th, 1970, National Guard troops opened fire on students protesting the war at Kent State University in Ohio, killing 4 and wounding 9 more. The shootings triggered a nationwide student strike that shut down hundreds of colleges and universities.
Could you imagine if that happened today? They did it in where was it? Was it Indonesia? There recently was a similar situation, and because the troops were, I think, so maybe law enforcement. No, I think it was law enforcement. Law enforcement shot civilian. During a massive protest, and because of it, the whole government collapsed. People were nuts. There were like millions of people. I think it was it? I don't remember if it was Indonesia. I don't want to say one thing for another, but I remember no, it was Nepal maybe. It was Nepal. So yeah, but that happened, and it was insane. And so, yeah, they went nuts. There were like millions of people. They actually destroyed some of the houses of politicians. They assassinated some of the politicians, and then the leader, the prime minister, he actually had to resign. And what happened is that, because you could think, but in that situation, why don't they use the army? And the reason is that, yeah, they did use the army, in the sense that then the leaders of the rebellion met with the leaders of the army, meaning the generals, and they came to an agreement whereby they decided, all right, then you guys, whatever, elect someone else. And they elected like a member of the coalition of the opposition party. It was a woman, and she became the new government, and so order was restored. The idea of, but why doesn't of course the army could come in with tanks and wipe out half the population, but then who are you going to tax? Not only that, but then you're going to have to look at like decades of guerrilla warfare, because now that you've done that, people will want blood for blood, and your international look from surrounding countries is going to be terrible. So it's not going to happen. So it's crazy that this actually happened. I didn't remember this one specifically in the US. Yeah, it was Nepal. Exactly. And so that's what happened there. The government collapsed because law enforcement or National Guard, one of the two, shot on the protesters. That's crazy. Yeah.
Think about what that does to you as a young person watching that unfold. The institutions are basically saying that they would rather shoot you than listen to you, and whatever moral authority those institutions held evaporates. A similar pattern played out in France during May 1968. Student protests against rigid universities led to police crackdowns and street battles in Paris, and within weeks around 10 million workers joined a general strike, which was the largest in French history.
Okay, yes, I am reading the chat. No, I'm reading all three. It's funny that someone is saying, Oh no, he's only reading Kick, but I'm not live on Kick. So I can't read Kick. No, I'm reading the live chat, but I also don't want to interrupt him too much during live streams, but I am reading chat. So I will. Let me see. Hello, Metrotron. Enjoy your YouTube videos very much and just wanted to express my thanks for all you and your colleagues' effort to deliver high-quality content. My pleasure. Thank you, Gav. Absolutely appreciate your support. It's really easy to stop thinking rationally when stuff like hits the fan. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Okay, my bad. No problem, Emmy Music TV. I appreciate that. All right, let's go.
The economy hadn't collapsed like Weimar Germany's, but a whole generation felt locked out by rigid institutions and a political class that refused to make room for them. In both cases, you see the same pattern. Institutions lose legitimacy, younger generations feel increasingly sacrificed or silenced, and more radical movements step in with a satisfying narrative. Yep. They say, you're not crazy, you're right to feel betrayed, here's who did this to you, and here's how we fight back.
Exactly.
Talking about this with a bit of nuance though, and I'm going to highlight this again in the later portion of the video, I do think some radical movements are necessary. You know, going on protest for students getting shot, going on this like nationwide meltdown, it's sometimes necessary in order to enact the change that you need. But you know, it is happening in a different sort of flavor here, and that's not necessarily the type of radical movements that I have been trying to criticize throughout this video and that I'm going to continue trying to criticize.
Okay.
These sorts of problems have only been highlighted and exacerbated to the nth degree in modern society. Yeah. Using our next condition I'm going to go over, the technological shifts we've received over the past couple decades, every corrupt politician or scandal has been dissected and exposed, leaving little to no room for manipulation. And when you couple that with an increasingly unstable and unpredictable environment, it's no wonder why the youth feels like they were betrayed and the future that they prepared for never came. But by far, what is probably the biggest contributor to radicalization?
I'm really interested in what he's going to say about tech. So we're going to watch a little bit of this, and then I'm going to stop the reaction, because I don't react to the whole thing. Also because I have other things to react to. But I'm really curious to see what he's going to say about technology.
Of all types that has undoubtedly affected all of these other conditions is the rise of the internet and smartphones. The globalization of information allowed us to educate ourselves on so much, but it also made it remarkably easier to fall into echo chambers of misinformation and extremist thinking to help us explain why we feel so lost, empty, hopeless, and displaced. Yep. It is not just politicians or people in power who can do the manipulating now. Anyone with enough confidence and perceived authority can lean into your confirmation bias, convincing you that your struggles are due to some singular life flaw or a certain group of people, when the reality is far more complex. Yes. Looksmaxing is one of those examples. Often looksmaxers align their beliefs highly with the black pill ideology. This is a sphere on the internet who believe that without good looks, you have zero chance of attracting somebody, getting a good job, or achieving basically any amount of success. But the foundations of society set them up for this kind of thinking. Before someone even considers themselves a black pillar, they're usually someone who's having more difficulty with women than they ever would have in previous generations, largely because the dating market has skewed in ways shaped by technology and a lack of stable opportunities. So what do? They go searching for answers online. Confirmation bias pushes them to focus only on what already feels true, which might be the belief that everything comes down to their looks.
This thing about the looks though, it's so easy really to debunk, because just find one scientist who studied really well and he's a nuclear physicist. Do you think that just because he's not good looking, he couldn't find a job? Like, it's kind of, but then again, if you're in an echo chamber, I can imagine they can tell you, oh, but that's just the exception. But the rule is maybe
start consuming black pill content in a viscerally emotional state, and the experiences within that community mirror their own. Slowly, they seep deeper and deeper into that rabbit hole, and that ideology seeps into everything they do. I can only imagine some version of this happened to that clavicular guy I mentioned at the beginning. Because let's be honest here, if technology and social media didn't push us to focus on the more superficial aspects of humanity, if the economy was stable and people had a fairly easy time getting a job and a partner, and it wasn't revealed that basically all institutions are lying to us and there's little meaning to extract from any of this, do you think the thought of I need to become a Chad Looksmaxer would have even crossed this guy's mind? Absolutely not. But the conditions of...
I'll be honest though, when it comes to radicalized groups, I mean, what he's saying makes a lot of sense. But personally, Looksmaxers are the least of my problems when it comes to radicalized groups that instead are dangerous. I'm just going to say it.
Society today create the perfect concoction to produce more radicalized young people because radicalization gives them something to grasp in a world that feels increasingly nebulous. It also gives them a sense of identity, which is unbelievably important when you're young and something that social media and institutions have broke. And that's another reason why this iteration of society feels so devoid of hope and purpose, even if there might be. At least in the past, if you were going through some shit, you would at least have that friend group or some sort of community, like a religious organization, that you could fall back to that hold the same beliefs as you. But the internet, in all of its individualized, hyperbolized sections, divides humans into extremely specific, unique subcategories that separate you from everyone else in a way that we have never seen before.
That is very true. I had to block a guy because I don't appreciate people putting threats in the chat. So you're gone.
When we gained access to any and all information, it gave us the ability to shape our beliefs into something uniquely our own. But the consequence was that agreeableness, even when it meant conforming to a group you didn't fully align with, began to erode. The amount of identity subgroups on the internet is insane now. There's gooners, doomer zoomers, e-girls, femcels, sigma males, neo-trad wives, based nationalists, anarcho-primitivists. The list is endless.
Goodness gracious.
You might not trust your government, your school, or your parents, but you can trust those guys in your Discord server or subreddit who can understand all the things that you're going through that nobody else can. Or
you know, I'm going to add something to this. You know how you have, when you go to the gym, you get the gym bros, and the gym bros give you the bro science when they tell you like something, as if they understood genetics, biology at a high level, but it's probably something that either someone else told them or they just saw after like 13 seconds of Google, but now they're like, this is scientist, bro science. You know who is the equivalent of bro science, but for politics? Shockman. Assam Piker. He's literally the bro politics. I really thought about that. He's the bro politics. That's the same level of depth of political analysis, and the difference between that guy talking politics on Twitch and like an actual political analyst. That's I'm gonna leave it at that. 2 more minutes and then we change video.
you can trust the creator who's telling you exactly why you're struggling and exactly who's to blame. And there's also something a bit more insidious going on with the internet and the feedback loop it provides that I don't think enough people really understand or are talking about. I brought this article up in my last video, but it is simply too important to not bring it up again. Ooh. This National Geographic article shows how social media keeps you in a constantly deregulated, traumatized state. In the article, there was a study measuring acute stress after viewing the pictures of the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, and they found that people who viewed more violent imagery were more likely to report post-traumatic stress symptoms like nightmares, hypervigilance, and emotional numbness 6 months later. But this is the insane part. Individuals who consumed over 6 hours of media per day reported more acute psychological symptoms like unwanted dreams, difficulty sleeping, and intrusive memories than those who were actually at the bombing.
Wow. That is insane. Given doomscrolling is awful. If I spend, you know what I'm doing these days when it comes to X? I make my posts, I don't read the comments. Because I noticed that when I was making the posts, occasionally do, but when I noticed that when I was making the posts, and then I would go into the comments, the level of filth that I had to deal with was to a point that it was intoxicating my day, and then I would be snappy with my dad, or like usually not with my wife because I've learned that one. But I'm in jet also because, I mean, to be fair, I really, really love my wife, so I don't want her to pay, or even at a modicum, the reason that maybe I might be annoyed because of some haters, I'm always going to be like nice and kind. It's just how I am. The reason why I don't do that with my dad is because my dad is so much into politics. Literally, that's all he does. So when he calls me, the calls get quite intense, even though we agree on a lot of positions, of course, because our politics are very similar. But anyways, just to say, I noticed it was affecting my everyday mental state. So now I don't even read it. I just post 12 times a day, 14 times a day on X. I don't even care. I just do it because I want to share my voice, and then because it makes me money. I'm just going to be honest with you. And besides, the other day on this note, there was this guy who, I don't know, he has a YouTube channel, but anyways, he was so focused. I don't know if I'll talk about it, maybe not. But he was so focused on trying to debunk me, and he was telling me, "Oh, you think you who do you think you are?" You know, and then I was telling him, I'm making my posts here, one, because I believe in what I'm saying, but two, because it makes me money. And he kept having to push this idea. It's not making you money. It's making sense. I'm like, how do you know? It's like, no, I'm an expert of social media studies, and I know that with the views you get on X, then probably you're making like 50 cents. And I'm like, I'm making $1,000 a month on X alone. So basically $12,000 a year just because I rant on X. Okay, I just said it. Full transparency. So yeah, I will do it. Of course I'm going to do it. I'll give 22% to the state for taxes, and the rest I'm going to keep. Great. I'll use it for my baby. I'll use it for my wife. I'll use it for myself. I'll buy a freaking can of Mountain Dew. So of course I'm going to continue to post on X, but at the same time, I'm not going to read anything because it's going to make me go nuts. It's going to make me go nuts. Good video. I will definitely put a link when this turns into an actual edited video. And I watched more than I was planning.